I am going to explain a story, and in the story, it basically contains the meaning of life. So, this is going to be a divine theory or a theologian theory or whatever. And it's going to in the story, it creates a hypothetical scenario about God and heaven and stuff like that. So, first thing is when it comes to the origins of God. The thing about whatever the one true God ends up being is that because that God, if there's one God, that God is basically um, all powerful and all knowing. And if God is all powerful, what that basically means is that there is no being more powerful than God. So when it comes to if God created the universe, then who created God? Well, that answers the question. No one created God, or the one true God, because that God would be all powerful if it is like the most powerful being in the entirety of any existence or universe or dimension, whatever. Um, so God has always been around for an eternity. Um, and in my story, I basically try to neutralize the language of like the name God and angels and things like that. So instead of it being called God, I basically call it the divine creator, the divine creator. And so I think what I decided in the end is that God basically lay dormant, or the divine creator remained dormant for an unknown period of time. And then eventually, the divine creator did what divine creators do. They create life and they create realities. So I think it starts off with the question that if you were a god and you were to create your own reality, would you make one that is imperfect, or will you create one that is perfect? Well, I assume everybody will say, well, I would create a perfect life without death and without pain. And that's exactly what the divine creator did. The divine creator decided to create a paradise, what I call a perfect reality. So, like, instead of being called a heaven or a paradise, it's called a perfect reality. So, God decided, and obviously, God's all knowing. So, obviously, God knew everything that would ever happen and has happened. So, everything would be kind of like planned and known about before God did any of this stuff. But in the original story, I kind of I didn't factor that in where God knows everything, knows the future. So the original version, and I'll kind of go back and forth and explaining like the old version and the different version and how they're different. So the first version, like God decided to create a being, and then God decided to create a perfect being. What some cultures call angels or Valkyries or whatever. There's different names, different religions. So the divine creator decided to create a perfect reality where every being within that reality is basically like invincible, invulnerable to pain and stuff like that. And they're incapable of doing bad things. And a part of the reason why they're incapable of doing bad things is because they don't have emotions or whatever, or maybe they have complete control of emotions. But in the original version, it's that they they don't have emotions, because emotions is one of the reasons why people or humanity is able to do bad things. People do bad things out of fear, anger, hate, all these different emotional words. So God decided to create a perfect reality first, and in this reality, God would create perfect beings that were flawless, invincible, and because they were in the presence of God, because God is all-knowing, because if you're in the presence of a being that knows everything, you become reliant on that being to give you all the answers. So essentially, when the angels were created and came into existence, they knew everything because they were in the presence of God, and they relied on God to give them all the information. So the angels were born knowing everything. They were born in my theories, like angels would be born like every one of them would be perfect beings would be born as 5-year-olds or whatever, fully grown human beings and or whatever. So God then basically lived in this heaven for an unknown period of time, and eventually God began to realize. Obviously, God already knows this is going to happen, and so therefore it's more like God saw the future, and then God decided to create perfect beings first, as kind of like an experiment, as kind of like a first trial in God's pursuit of creating the ideal being with the ideal existence. So after an unknown period of time, in the original version, it's God realized that something was missing. God basically realized that the angels had no purpose, because they had nothing to pursue, because they knew everything. And because they knew everything, any problems would just be solved automatically, because they would know about the problems before they commit to them, and they can just solve the problems before they even happen. But also, because God made them emotionless, the inability to feel emotions, they had nothing to bring them meaning. Because in order for something to have meaning to you, there has to be emotional attachment, like joy, happiness, or love. Like you love your family, and therefore your family gives you meaning because of that application of your emotion of love applied towards them or onto them. So God realized that angels being emotionless and then having the inability to feel had no meaning in their life. They couldn't feel happiness. They couldn't feel joy. They couldn't feel anything negative either. They couldn't feel sadness. They couldn't feel misery or loneliness. And I think I got a theory on my a video on my channel called the Hive Mind, and that explains a little bit where like angels or the perfect being, they had no free will because they were in the presence of God, and because God's all powerful, no God can actually outwill the most powerful being in existence. No being can outwill the divine creator, this perfect divine creator. Another thing within my theories as well, the true form of God is actually an energy, a form of energy of pure life and creation called divine energy. And divine energy is God's true form. And because God is an energy, God doesn't have a sex. God doesn't even have a biology. Doesn't have a body. So God's true form is an energy. And the reason why, what proves that is that if God is going to be omnipresent, as in God is able to be present in infinite places at once and everywhere at once, the only way that can be achieved if God's true form, or the divine creator's true form, is actually an energy. So God's true form is an energy because God is energy. Divine energy is what God actually is. So because so when it comes to another thing, when God realized they had no meaning, because they knew everything, and they had no problems to solve, they had nothing to drive them forward into the future. So because they were given all knowledge or infinite knowledge of all things, they didn't have the ability to pursue knowledge themselves or to create knowledge themselves. So what God decided to do then, or the divine creator, see, I keep it, they're interchangeable words, and I kind of, because God rolls off the tongue, that's why I keep on saying God all the time, even though if I was writing it down, I would just call it the divine creator and perfect beings or whatever. So God, after realizing those flaws of the angels, being the inability to have emotions, the inability to pursue, the ability to pursue knowledge, and the inability to have meaning in their lives, God decided, or the divine creator decided, to destroy the heavens and destroy the angels. So that's what God eventually decided to do. And then because the perfect beings had no will, they just basically followed the will of God because they trusted in God wholeheartedly. So God then decided to first, and it's just, this is the order which I explain it. First, God decided to destroy the heavens to create the universe. God then wanted to destroy the angels to become the souls of humans. So that means that, yes, human beings were actually angels, or their souls were once angels that existed within the perfect reality, what some people call heaven, or they existed in perfect reality. Should I do that for part one? I think I'm going to do that for part one. The 3 sacrifices is the next part. Or should I? Right, I just remember what I was talking about. So God decided. So first, God was going to destroy the universe to create. Sorry, wrong order. First, God was going to destroy the heavens to create the universe. Then God was going to destroy the angels to become the souls of humans. And after God would sacrifice all that God sacrificed, God would sacrifice God's own self. And in this instance, it would be like God would sacrifice God's ability to be a single entity, or like to be a singular humanoid being. And then God would, well, what essentially would happen then is God would destroy God's self and disperse into divine energy, and that divine energy then would go into creating the universe. And divine energy would eventually be the thing that keeps everything in the universe from, is it imploding and like separating from itself. So God, divine energy is the glue that would keep that reality, the future reality together. So God then committed to the 3 sacrifices. God sacrificed the heavens, and then so so you'd have, so first it'd be the creation. So you'd have the dormant state of God, be the first part. The plan to create the first existence, and then you have the original period of time where heaven was existed and where God existed with the perfect beings, and then you have the destruction of the heavens, and then so before the Big Bang happened, whatever existed before would be the remains of a destroyed heaven. And then the Big Bang happened, and then the universe gets created. And then the angels willingly sacrifice themselves to become the souls, the life force that would give every being their life. And then you have the creation of the universe, and then the expansion of the universe. So God then proceed to destroy the heavens, the angels, and God Self to create the universe, humanity, the universe. Yeah, the universe exists, the next existence and humanity. And then, so the next part is like a little bit of like a line that I say that the things which God creates are an extension of God's own self. As in, a part of God gets put into the things in which God creates. The things which God creates are an extension of God's own self. As in, a part of God gets put into the things in which God creates. Right. So if God created the universe consists of actual God because it's created in divine energy. Now, when it comes to divine energy in a mortal realm cannot be observed. Even if you were to get the best microscope possible that could actually go into the fabric of what everything consists of, you wouldn't be able to actually find divine energy, which people often think would think of it as a light, of pure life and creation, like a light energy of pure life and creation. So, yeah, so that's kind of like those parts of this hypothetical story. And in this story, heaven wasn't existed heaven existed a long time ago, the perfect reality existed a long time ago, and then it was destroyed to create the universe to give people emotions so they can feel and apply meaning to things, and also so that they can have so when humankind was created, we were born and came into existence knowing nothing. So therefore we had to create numbers, letters, alphabets, and languages. And we had to create knowledge like geography, history, science, biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics. We had to create all of human knowledge on our own, which we would do bit by bit, gradually over time. So the reason why God destroyed the heaven is to give humankind meaning. And I think a lot of this would be explained in my other video called Package Philosophy, where perfect beings and human beings are the exact opposite. And what exists within a perfect reality cannot exist within the imperfect reality. So both realities are the exact opposite of each other. So in Package Philosophy would be the next part, but I've already done a video for that. This video is going to be long enough already. So when it comes to the afterlife now, because heaven was destroyed a long time ago, wasn't it? So what would eventually happen is the universe keeps on expanding, and eventually either humankind or intelligent life becomes so advanced, we essentially turn ourselves into gods, and we essentially recreate heaven, or the universe gets destroyed, and then heaven gets recreated for a second time, right? And then the way it works is that you have to live a benevolently good life because God is also omnibenevolent, or the divine creator is omnibenevolent, is all good. And if you're going to be rewarded with the paradise, you have to be all good. And in order to get into the recreated heaven, you have to live a benevolent life. And in this story, there's reincarnation. So if I, for instance, fail to live a perfectly benevolent life, because who I am is memory stored within the brain, and my body dies after I'm dead, or my mind dies after I'm dead, I get erased. And because I didn't live a benevolent enough life, I wouldn't gain ownership of my soul, or my brain and who I am fails to imprint itself onto the human soul. And then if you live in a benevolent life, you imprint who you are. You imprint your life's journey onto the soul that you possess. And then when heaven eventually becomes created, you become recreated as your perfect self. And so when we die in this story, we basically become part of the divine if we prove ourselves worthy, or we cease to exist, because ceasing to exist is both punishment and it's also a gift. Because one of the things that God realized as well is that emotions are mortal and can only exist within a mortal life. And one of the reasons why God destroyed the heaven and destroyed the angels is because God would. Oh, no, wait. Well, the divine creator destroyed the angels because they had no emotions. And then when the people, I want to use the word humanity, the people that prove themselves worthy get reincarnated in the recreated heaven, and then they become the gods of their own reality. But then what? And you might think that the story ends there, but it doesn't, because what basically ends up happening is that the angels, or the perfect beings, sorry, they would exist for like thousands of years, and they will eventually feel their emotions. They will begin to sense that their emotions are dying, because emotions are mortal and they can only exist within a mortal life. So those beings that prove themselves worthy, after they lived their second lives, because we potentially live two lives. Actually, no, we actually lived three lives, didn't we? We were the original angel. Our souls were the original angels that existed in heaven. Then we were the imperfect humans, and then we become perfect humans and recreated perfect beings. And then what would happen then is, either, in the scenario where we become the peak of human condition and human intelligence. When we become the peak of human intelligence, because the universe is expanding and eventually the universe was going to get destroyed. The peak human condition humans, they would eventually figure out a way of controlling the universe and preventing the universe from dying. Like, if it's down to the universe expanding, they'll figure out how to stop the expanse. If it's the sun's dying, they will figure out how to replenish the energy. Replenish the energy of the suns. So one possibility is that when the recreated perfect beings, the recreated angels, what they basically decide to do is that they decide to recreate the process again. And they decide to destroy the recreated heaven to recreate the universe from scratch. And then the cycle then basically repeats itself for an eternity. And the thing is that you might think that this is the first universe. This has actually been one universe out of many. The heaven that gets created has already been created. The process has already happened an infinite period of times. The process has already happened an infinite period of times. And it will continue to repeat itself for eternity. And the purpose of that story is, it basically explains the plan, the design behind this existence, why it is, why God created, or the divine creator created this reality the way it is. And also, it basically explains the meaning of life. The meaning of life is having the presence of emotion and the ability to pursue knowledge and the ability to solve problems and to learn. And so the whole story is designed to create a specific scenario where there is a specific meaning of life. And this story contains or is used with stipulation theory. And stipulation theory is one of the hardest theories to explain, and I will explain that in another video. Thank you very much for watching the video. Please like and subscribe if you appreciate what I'm doing. Stay tuned for into the Pioneer of True Centrism show. And hopefully we can all enlighten each other together to change the world and make the world a better place. Thank you very much for watching my show, or this video. Thank you very much. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for the little people actually watch. Thank you very much.